It's oversteering.
It's understeering.
It's doing both. I'm gonna show you how to drive every single car right. As usual, before I get into something, I give background and science to bring understanding and backup for every single point I make. The truth is, God made something amazing called a revolution. And you see, a revolution is not just turning around. It has to be revolving around something, ruling over it and controlling whether it even turns or not. The planets revolve around the sun, and all creation revolves around God, as everything was made by Him. And without Him, nothing that is here would be here right now, including you. And as we learned in the study of the mystery of objective beauty, that whatever is made to be beautiful has to follow God's law of beauty. Line harmony that makes proportions that are in harmony. Every part connected to another part along the same trajectory with the same rhythm, but fulfilling different purposes. There's also revolution. It's all revolving around one theme. The fact is, for something to work best and most efficiently, it also has to follow God's law. God also designed air, which means cars need to also follow the laws of aerodynamics. They also need to follow God's law of mass over revolutions. I'm going to use that to explain how to drive a car to perfection in today's video. Just like there is a hierarchy among planets and stars, with everything revolving around the sun, which takes the most energy to run and which is the biggest and heaviest. The biggest, heaviest thing in your car is what everything must revolve around. You get it? So all four wheels must revolve around your engine. Every single thing must revolve around your engine. The proof is in the tires. Let me prove it to you. First, let's just go over a few things. Grip. Grip is sliding friction. Your tire has a contact patch. Now, many cars and tires are different in the way they respond to steering input. Torque. Torque is force at a distance. So in an engine, torque is how big the diameter of your crank pin line is on your crankshaft. You know that too. Revolution, pivot, axis, and lines. Something revolving has what we call revolutions. That's how we count how many times it revolves. For there to be revolutions, there has to be a pivot to revolve around. And all of the time is mass revolving around that pivot. Mass from the thing revolving or connected to the thing revolving. The further away it is from the pivot, the more mass is magnified, because mass at a distance is weight torque. You know that too. Now in a car there are four tires and many things that revolve, but when something is revolving and moving towards a trajectory at the same time, there are access lines. Access lines that are lines the masses have. You know that too. If you don't, now you know. Now my theory, all four wheels must rotate around the engine, since the engine is the biggest, heaviest thing in your car. Well, unless you're this guy, then you're the thing that the car must revolve around. A front to rear wheel speed ratio that is variable according to the rotation pivot location.
The only reason wheel speed ratio matters is because if the engine is not dead center in the car, the wheels farthest from the engine have a distance to travel rotating on their axis.
During cornering, the inside wheel and outside wheel has variable speed ratios. It gets more aggressive, favoring outside wheels going faster by closeness to the pivot of rotation, which is the engine, if it's not you. So our first car that we're going to test to see how to drive it at full potential, not wasting one bit of the car, driving it perfectly balanced. The car is a Toyota 86. The A86 has a 1.6 liter naturally aspirated inline-4 engine mounted in the front position, 50% in front of the front axle, leaning slightly offset backwards. For all four wheels to rotate around the engine, the rear wheels must have a rather aggressive offset angle. They have to travel around the pivot, the engine. There should be an aggressive high wheel speed ratio, favoring rear wheels going faster, balanced along the axis of the rotation. While the front wheels are perfectly on either side of the engine, they should be rotating around the engine by a perfect inside to outside wheel speed ratio around the super short rotational axis they have around the engine. The aggression level that the position requires is almost like the inside wheel should be moving in reverse and the outside wheel should be accelerating forward fast. Okay, obviously not literally reverse, but you get my point. And there is zero steering needed. Not just needed, wanted. Only turn in initiation. Rather, the car is facing the steering input the car would need without this perfect rotation. Once the front to rear wheel speed ratio and the front to rear offset angle is perfectly synced in axis of rotation, the front wheel's open diff will allow the front wheels inside and outside wheel speed ratio to auto sync in perfect rotation due to the road forcing each wheel to the correct speeds to sync perfectly in the rotation axis. But the rear inside and outside wheel speed ratio can only be tuned by driver skill and differential tuning. And by the speed the car is moving forward, in the direction the car is facing, the rear wheels are pushing the engine forward hard in the direction it's rotating around the engine. Any more rotation than this caused by too much throttle causing a drift or something, and you no more pushing your engine but rather pushing the space before your engine and wasting all the energy. You are driving more unbalanced than your mother.
What?
The S2000 is a little pocket rocket with a 2-liter naturally aspirated inline-4 engine with VTEC that sits behind your front axle. That's what makes it front mid-engined. But due to the engine being inside the wheelbase, now the front wheels also rotate around the engine by micro steering input. The wheel speed ratios are slightly lower and the offset angle is also lower. This means you can be more aggressive with the throttle, opening it wider because you have more leverage to push your engine with the rear wheels while they are also rotating around the engine. Yes, I know this can get very confusing. Just pause the video if your brain is hurting. By the distance the rear wheels travel in an FR to perfectly rotate around the engine and move towards a trajectory, they are also pushing the engine in the direction the car is rotating. So there's more room to push the engine for wider throttle opening, faster entry, mid-corner and exit. Everything is faster. A Shelby Daytona is the king of the front mid-engine layout. The engine sits not just behind the front axle, but behind the front wheels. So you can open the throttle wider, put more power down, turn harder, just drive faster. And just like the S2000, no fancy electric systems to compensate for an imbalance, just good old-fashioned balance. Your inside to outside wheel speed ratio will be much less aggressive since now the front wheels can actually rotate around the engine, with the engine being a distance from the wheels and not the wheels being on either side of the engine. But there is a car hidden under the blankets. And this ain't an elephant in the room because it is one of the furthest things from an elephant. It has a 4.8 liter naturally aspirated V10 mounted behind the front axle. Then there's a drive shaft going towards the rear of the car. And in the mid-rear position is a trans-axle 6-speed automated single-clutch manual gearbox. The gearbox gives rear weight, increasing the rear grip, but it also has inertia. Does this look like an imbalance to you? You wouldn't be wrong, but at the same time you are wrong. Let me explain why. You would think that in cornering there are two things wanting to be pivot of rotation, like in a 488 that also has a transaxle, but that sticks out of the rear boots instead. The engine and the gearbox. So four-wheel gripping using the gearbox as a pivot of rotation during the turn, you are pulling your engine. No good. And using the engine as a pivot of rotation, the transaxle gives you more grip, but also inertia that makes the rear want to slide excessively further. Well, that's where you're wrong. That is not proper rotation if that's the result. You're missing your engine if that's the result. Because the placement of the gearbox is still within the wheelbase of the car. It is in line with the rear wheel's axis line created by the rotation around the engine and the trajectory of where the car is going. It's synced in harmony with that line. It's like a third wheel, so it shouldn't act as an inertial liability. The LFA's gearbox does have inertia, totally 100%. You can't have weight without inertia, but it can be used for the advantage, putting more grip on the rear tires, being the extra power the rear wheels have to rotate around the engine even harder, so you can corner even faster. This all just needs laser sharp control, honed by a true ninja. That's the only way you can drive an LFA properly. An AMG GTR makes it so much easier to drive the same layout of an LFA. It has opposing rear wheel steering. The rear wheel steering doesn't only help to rotate the rear wheels around the engine, but it also keeps traction. As the inertia of the transaxle pulls the rear out, the rear wheel steering catches the rear tires, releasing some inertial pressure off the rear tires, preventing traction loss. It's a true marvel to drive. But there is something that at first glance will be a total contradiction, but is my favorite platform out of the front mid-engine cars. The Mazda RX-7, FC and FD, and the Ferrari F12 TDF. The RX-7 from the FC gen to the FD gen has a 1.3 liter, or counting every single cylinder for intake, exhaust and combustion, it's a 2.6 liter twin turbo, twin rotor engine mounted behind the front axle. It's super short and very small. The gearbox is right behind it, and the front is so fast that they had to put same way rear wheel steering on it to keep the rear gripping and slow down the front end. It was just too fast. Driven wrong, not rotating the wheels around the engine, the rear wheel steering is able to make the engine overhaul the front end with weight torque. It makes it feel like the engine is mounted a meter in front of the front axle. But this rear wheel steering system creates a hidden feature of high speed cornering. It demands more aggression in throttle inputs to rotate the four wheels around the engine. It's very much like the LFA, taking the demand for a ninja's precision to drive it. They are in the same league. Whereas on the other hand, an AMG GTR is helping you rotate the four wheels around the engine. So in the RX-7, opening the throttle to make the rear wheels rotate around the engine, the margin is very small and tricky like an LFA, but this time it's due to the rear wheel steering. And there is a super narrow margin for error. This means it's easy to just drift too much, miss your engine, put pressure on your rear tires, mess it all up. When every single input is perfect to make the rear wheels rotate around the engine, they'll be rotating around the engine but also pushing the engine at a slightly different direction to the S2000. As the rear wheels would be pointing more inside, they will try to flip the car the other way. That's how powerful these rear wheels are. That's why rear wheel steering is no joke. So there needs to be some more steering input or just more rotation, and that makes you go even faster around the turn. These are all cars that beg you to turn faster. The Mitsubishi Land Evo has an engine 100% in front of the axle. It's sideways mounted with the gearbox right beside it on the left. The rotation of all four wheels around the engine is kind of not like an 8.6. The rear wheels have the same principles, has a very similar axis, but the front wheels are rotating around the engine that is in front of it, just like the rear wheels. In this case, yes, just like the A86 and the other cars, where the car is facing is the steering angle input it would have without rotation. So again, not much need to steer at all. Taking an FR to full potential, you have to drift it. But there's a blind spot in the theory. As much as I'd hate to admit it, this perfect rotation seems to wear out tires. Or does it? There is normal understeer. Then there is something called blocking friction. This is the worst driving sin of all time. It's when you understeer with so much angle that your front tires become friction blockers to anything that comes in its way, including tarmac. They're like dust pans. It's a brick wall you are forming against the road you're supposed to be treading. But it's not just the front tires, you see. The fact is that skidding the rear tires creates more tire to road friction in the wrong way. Grip turning with your fronts. Your front tires are grabbing the road tightly and throwing it behind. But drifting the rears are diagonally pointing. They're not grabbing the road and throwing it behind exactly like the fronts are. With the pivot of rotation so far front that there's such a big offset angle for the rear wheels to rotate around the engine, it's still rotating, but the rear tires are acting like a brake because it has blocking friction. The blocking friction is not as bad as it would be if the car was literally sideways, but I mean, it's still there. The tires, even while accelerating, I mean, it's still in that position. It's still slowing down, blocking the car from moving forward to a point.
It is a fight of blocking and grabbing.
Wearing out your tires. The tire is fighting against itself. It's self-destructing. You're still rotating, you're still moving towards a direction. But if you manage to accelerate enough in order to not be deaccelerating while you're rotating, man, your tires are going to be gone in a few because of the harsh fight of acceleration and deacceleration on the same tire. Because of this blocking friction side effect, there's a really clever technique of rotation that has been adopted by very few amazingly skillful drivers, and it is called the brake drift. It's used sometimes in rally. Keiichi Tsuchiya drives with this technique sometimes. It's the same rotation we've been talking about, but your rears are absorbing the impact of the friction.
You're putting the friction to good use.
And the whole car is deaccelerating from that as you're braking and turning into the corner. No acceleration, no open throttle. You're brake drifting into the corner, from entrance to mid-corner, sometimes even near exit. And then you must totally slam the gas pedal at the exit. This brake drift technique is so efficient, like the transaxle rotating a Ferrari during deceleration, turning into the corner. No one can outbrake you. The Mazda RX-7 with the same way rear wheel steering works insane with this technique. Probably the best. Watch how this Kia race car did a 4-wheel rotation, braking, drift. It's not perfect, but man, this is the greatest overtake of all time. This guy right beside his opponent backs out from beside him due to no room. Then he pulls off a drift entry, and for a small moment of that entry, drifting on deceleration with a perfect 4-wheel rotation. Can you see how the car is gravitating towards the trajectory that the car is facing? It's gravitating to the apex. The whole car just wants to go in that direction. But then he drifted a bit too much, he counter-steered. But for that key moment, oh, you gotta adore his driving. Pushing the little Kia, there was enough rotation to pull off the move. He performed a near-perfect braking drift entry. No, come on, there's gotta be another way. I gotta be able to rotate my car. This gotta be the most efficient way to drive, rotating it around the engine. That's what you said. How can driving my S2000 the best to full potential be self-destruction? Sorry, what did you say about S2000? Don't you think there had to be a reason I say the S2000, AMG, GTR, and Daytona are the best? Come on, man, I don't say things for nothing. There are levels to rotation, there are levels to blocking friction, and there are levels to tire walking, or tire grabbing, or slip angle. All the same thing. Let me explain this to you and show you how it works with the chart. The more or less angle you need to rotate the rear wheels due to engine placement, the more or less blocking friction you have. As you see, the toe has an influence on the tires, but this is so little And the truth is, it's on purpose to keep the tires hot enough on the straights. While they're not doing any cornering, they're just going straight. The tires are not twisting, they're not compressing, so there's hardly any heat. They need to stay hot for the next corners coming up. So that's the usefulness of toe. But it gives so little blocking friction, it's almost not worth mentioning. The first few legends, the 296 and NSX, mid-rear engine cars, rear-wheel drive, so they have almost zero friction. The Lamborghini Aventador, even though it is a mid-engine car and not mid-rear as a 296 or an NSX, it has the same amount of blocking friction due to the opposing rear wheel steering that rotates the rear wheels for you. The AMG 1 here also, the masterpiece that I'm going to talk about in a future episode. It's also right there. They are such well thought through, great balanced cars, all these that I've mentioned. They hardly produce blocking friction. When the S2000 comes is where it starts getting a little bit bad. But for the S2000, it's still not bad enough to call drifting a liability. Proper rotation in an S2000, it works. Shelby Daytona, even better, with the engine being behind the front wheels and not just behind the front axle. AMG GTR has opposed rear wheel steering, again just like the SVJ, to do some of that rotation for you, so it's slightly better than the S2000 even. But the problem comes now. The 86 and the Land Evo have it worst, especially the Evo, with the engine of the 86 in the front position, whereas the Evo's engine is directly in front of the front axle, which gives the Evo's rear wheels the largest rotation access out of all the cars we've talked about. This is what makes the S2000 Viper and Daytona simply better designed than the Evo and 86. It's more balanced. It's just plain better. The Evos and Civics and all, their tires are fighting against themselves. The whole car is self-destructing during rotation. Oh, and when you're not rotating, you're still killing your tires, pulling your engine. Perfect rotation doesn't work for them because they are just flawed. The engine placement is not listening to the tires. Once again, it is proven, where there is discord, there is destruction.
But the truth is, implementing only some attributes of rotation into your driving can still be fast. It is still rotation. A high lifted front-to-rear wheel speed ratio favoring rear wheels moving faster can act on the chassis to almost push the engine mass farther rear and make turning faster and easier on the front tires. DK perfected driving an S2000, Evo and GTR with all the attributes of rotation except for the offset angle drift part. Look at how he handles this GTR so well, but sometimes he would make short bursts of drift rotation to turn tighter and harder. DK brought these and many more cars near their limits using various attributes of rotation. In the case of the Evo, incomplete rotation around some turns might be the fastest.
So is drifting faster than gripping? If you do it right, for some cars, yes, drifting is totally better. Drifting is one of the attributes to their full potential. But if you're driving a car with the engine in front of the front axle or something, then only pull off a brake drift entry. By the middle of the turn, I want to know that all four wheels are perfectly gripping and you're accelerating, darting out of that corner like a Druid of Wrath. Here's a little driving tip for you. While you're driving your S2000, during a perfect rotation, while you're feeling so good about yourself, but then in mid-corner you realize, oh, I entered way too fast. I'm about to slam into the wall. Get a higher angle drift possessing a higher level of blocking friction. That will slow you down, but you'll still have enough angle and you'll still be turning, gravitating towards the trajectory, which is the apex. Not ideal, but better than smashing the wall. The ideal way is you should have entered at the correct speed, but you didn't, so shame.